I was standing at the blackjack table when my own son pushed a single chip across the felt. Just $1, placed with a smirk as if he were tossing scraps to a beggar. His voice cut sharper than the neon lights overhead. "Here, Dad. Don't lose it all at once." The table went quiet. Laughter from the crowd behind us stalled. And then, when the dealer asked for my ID, his hand froze midair. He looked at me, then back at the card, and the silence grew heavier than the weight of any debt. People stared, waiting for me to react, expecting me to shrink into my son's mockery. I felt the sting deeper than I can explain, not from the casino lights, not from the strangers, but from the boy I once carried on my shoulders. He wanted to reduce me to a man who had nothing left, a man scraping for $1. He thought he was showing off, proving he was now the successful one. But when the dealer's eyes widened, as if my name or my past carried more weight than any pile of chips, I knew something had shifted. The humiliation was real, sharp, burning my chest, but behind it, a seed was planted. What would I do after this? I didn't show it in my face. Dignity is often nothing more than the art of silence. I slid the lonely chip back across the table and let the laughter return, disguising itself as coughs and whispers. My son leaned back in his chair, smug, already celebrating a victory he hadn't truly won. He didn't know that one gesture could change the course of a man's heart. He didn't know that behind my stillness, old memories were waking. When you've been humiliated by your own blood, the wound cuts differently. It isn't just pride, it's history, it's fatherhood, it's nights spent working 2 jobs to keep food on the table. As he laughed, I remembered the nights I came home with grease still on my hands from the auto shop, only to drive him to his basketball games, cheering louder than anyone in the stands. Now he tossed me a single chip, as if that was all the value left in me. Have you ever lived something like this? A moment where family turns your sacrifices into a joke? If you have, tell me in the comments where you're from, because stories like this shouldn't stay hidden. People deserve to know they're not alone. The dealer finally blinked, glanced at my son, and cleared his throat. "Sir," he said quietly, sliding my ID back to me, "are you sure you want to play tonight?" His tone wasn't mocking, it was cautious, almost respectful. My son didn't notice. He was too busy ordering another drink. But I caught it, and I tucked it away. That night at the casino didn't end with me winning or losing money. It ended with a silent promise. My son believed he had the power to humiliate me, but he had forgotten something important. I had lived longer, fought harder, and carried scars he couldn't even imagine. $1 chip was not the weight of my worth. The question burning inside me wasn't whether I would forgive him. It was how, and when, I would teach him the lesson that dignity doesn't vanish with age. He left early with his friends, leaving me behind at the table like an afterthought. I sat there with the chip still in my hand. I turned it over, watching the light catch its edges, and in that little circle of plastic and metal, I saw more than he ever intended. It wasn't a gift, it wasn't even an insult, it was a spark. A reminder that even the smallest gesture can light a fire inside a man who refuses to be forgotten. And so the seed of vengeance took root, not in rage but in patience. For vengeance, real vengeance, is never rushed. It brews, it waits, it grows until the moment comes when the one who mocked you must face the truth of who you really are. But the first step was silence. I pocketed the chip, walked out into the cold night, and let the neon fade behind me. That little disc burned like coal in my pocket all the way home. What I didn't know yet was that the next morning, my son's arrogance would spill over into my house, my kitchen, my life, and the humiliation would cut even deeper before the tide began to turn. The morning after the casino humiliation, my kitchen smelled faintly of old coffee grounds and toast. I had woken up early, as I always did, slipping into the ritual of boiling water, buttering bread, and listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator. These small routines are a man's armor when the world tries to strip him bare. I wanted quiet, a moment to collect myself, to decide whether last night was a wound I should bury or a scar I would eventually brand back on my son. But peace doesn't last long when arrogance lives under the same roof. He came in without knocking, swinging the door open with the same careless swagger he had at the casino. "Morning, Dad," he said, dropping a bag of fast food on the counter as if he owned the place. "Thought you might like something greasy. You've always had cheap taste." He laughed, tearing into his sandwich without washing his hands. I watched him, leaning on the counter, sipping from my chipped mug. His words didn't sting as much as the tone, the deliberate dismissal. My son was no longer speaking to me as a man speaks to his father. He was talking down, as though I were some worn-out relic taking up space in his life. That was worse than the single chip at the casino. At least there, he was showing off to strangers. Here, in my kitchen, it was personal. "Did you sleep well?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. My dignity lived in the calmness of my tone. "Like a king," he replied through a mouthful of food. "It's good to win, Dad. You should try it sometime. Last night was just fun, you know? Don't take it too seriously." He leaned back in the chair, legs spread wide, like a conqueror in his own castle. I wanted to remind him of the nights when this same kitchen table was covered in his homework, when I stayed up late teaching him how to multiply, or when I coached him on his first speech for school. I wanted to ask him where that boy had gone, the boy who once cried into my shoulder when he lost his first basketball game, who asked me if failure made him worthless. Back then, I told him failure was just the first step toward victory. I never imagined he'd grow into a man who saw his own father's dignity as disposable. I took a slow breath, forcing my memories back into silence. "Winning isn't everything," I said quietly. He smirked, brushing crumbs onto the floor. "That's what losers say." The words landed heavy, sharper than knives. I didn't answer. Silence, again, was my only shield. But inside, my mind was racing. He didn't just want to mock me, he wanted to erase me, to make me small enough that he could feel larger in comparison. After breakfast, he started wandering through the house like a landlord inspecting a tenant's space. He picked up photographs, flipping them carelessly. He even chuckled at one of the older family pictures. Me in my younger days, standing tall in a suit, his mother beside me in a floral dress, him as a little boy clinging to my hand. "Look at you," he said. "Thought you were some kind of big shot, huh?" That laugh struck deeper than I let show. I remembered the day that photo was taken. A church picnic in Ohio, his mother still alive, the sun warm and gentle. I had been proud that day, proud of my family, proud of the life I had built brick by brick. To hear him laugh at that memory was to feel him spit on everything I had fought for. He didn't stop there. He opened drawers, shuffled through papers, even lifted the lid of the old cigar box I kept on the shelf. That box wasn't for cigars. It held keepsakes. My father's pocket watch, letters from my wife when we were dating, and a folded flag from my brother's funeral. He looked inside and said, "Old junk. You really hold on to everything, don't you? Guess when you've got nothing left, you cling to scraps." I walked over and closed the box firmly, my hand steady, but my jaw tight. "That's not junk," I said. He shrugged. "Whatever. Maybe one day I'll clean this place out for you. You know, make it modern." That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just a phase of arrogance, or a bad night carrying over into the morning. My son had grown into a man who didn't just forget his roots. He despised them. And he despised me for being a reminder of them. The rest of the day passed in tension. He made phone calls, bragging loudly to his friends about his winnings at the casino. He left empty beer cans on the counter, his voice booming through the house I had worked decades to pay off. Every word, every gesture, was another chip stacked on the pile of humiliation. But vengeance doesn't grow in anger alone. It grows in observation. I studied him. I listened. I began to notice the cracks, the way his voice trembled slightly when he mentioned money, the hurried tone when he told his friend he'd settle the debt soon. He wasn't as invincible as he wanted me to believe. That night, when he finally left, I sat back down at the kitchen table with that single casino chip still in my pocket. I placed it on the wood, turning it slowly with my finger. The weight of it seemed heavier now, like it carried more than plastic and metal. It carried my son's scorn, his arrogance, and also his weakness. I thought of the dealer's frozen expression the night before, how he looked at my ID with something more than curiosity. There was recognition in his eyes, respect even. I hadn't paid attention then, too consumed by my son's mockery, but now the memory stirred something old inside me. There were parts of my life my son didn't know, parts I had never told him because he never asked. He thought I was just a man who worked with grease under his nails, a man who lived quietly in a modest house. He had no idea the stories buried in my past. The chip glowed faintly under the kitchen light, and I made a silent vow. I would not raise my voice. I would not lash out. That's what he wanted, to see me break. No, my revenge would be quiet, calculated, patient. He thought he had stripped me of power, but he had only awakened it. I picked up the chip, pressed it between my palms, and whispered to the empty room, "This is not over." Sleep did not come easy that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing echoes of my son's laughter. But I also felt something I hadn't in years, a current of energy, of purpose. Age may bend the body, but it sharpens the mind if you let it. And my mind was sharpening, cutting away the hesitation, honing itself into a blade that would not be seen until it struck. What he didn't know, what no one at that casino knew, was that I carried more than memories in my pockets. I carried connections, knowledge, and a past he could not mock away. The dealer's frozen stare had reminded me. The world hadn't forgotten who I was. And soon, neither would my son. But before that lesson, he would humiliate me one more time. A deeper cut, sharper than the chip or the photographs or the greasy fast food laughter. And that cut would give me exactly the opening I needed. The next humiliation came faster than I expected. By Saturday evening, my son had decided we should celebrate his winning streak. Celebrate meant dragging me to a neighborhood bar he liked to call his second office. It wasn't the kind of place I would have chosen. Sticky floors, jukebox humming old country songs no one listened to anymore, and televisions blaring sports highlights above the bar. The smell of stale beer clung to the air, and the laughter of men trying too hard to sound important filled the corners. I didn't want to go. But when your own blood insists, sometimes silence is heavier than refusal. I went, not to drink, but to watch, to learn. He strutted in like a celebrity, waving at bartenders who pretended to know him, high-fiving men who barely remembered his name. I followed a few steps behind, hands in my coat pockets, trying not to think about how strange it felt to be paraded like a relic. "This is my old man," he announced as soon as we reached a table. His voice carried, cutting through the chatter, pulling eyes toward us. "Brought him here so you can see where I get my charm." Laughter rolled around the room and he smirked, proud of himself. I sat down quietly, not returning the glances, not feeding the fire. The waitress came, young and tired-looking, with a pad in her hand. "What'll you have?" "I'll take a beer," he said, slapping the menu closed. Then, pointing at me, he added, "Get him a water. He can't handle anything stronger." Another round of laughter followed. The sting of that moment was sharper than the casino chip. A father reduced to a joke in front of strangers, his dignity tossed aside for cheap entertainment. I felt my face grow hot. Not from shame, but from the restraint it took to keep my silence. I looked at him, really looked at him. His shirt was pressed but too tight across the belly, his watch shiny but scratched, his smile wide but empty, confidence built on sand. He thought he was a king, but I saw the cracks in his crown. As the night went on, he bragged about his winnings, his friends, his supposed future business deals. Each story grew larger, taller, less believable. I caught the sideways glances from the men at nearby tables. They weren't laughing with him, they were laughing at him, but he was too blind to see. And then came the moment that would carve itself into my memory. He pulled a crumpled wad of bills from his pocket, slammed it on the table, and shouted, "This is what I made last night." His friends cheered, though none of them knew how much of it was already promised to debts. Then, with a sudden smirk, he turned to me. "Hey, Dad," he said loudly enough for the whole bar to hear. "Tell them about your big night at the casino. Tell them how you walked away with—" He paused, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out that single chip, the very same one he had mocked me with, and held it high. $1, a true high roller. The bar erupted in laughter. Even the waitress chuckled as she poured drinks at the next table. My son leaned back in his chair, soaking in the attention like a man bathing in sunlight. I sat still, staring at the chip in his hand, the cheap plastic glinting under the neon beer signs. To them, it was a joke. To me, it was a reminder. A reminder of how far he had strayed from the boy I raised, and a reminder of the vow I had made to myself. "Enjoy the laugh," I said quietly, my voice almost lost beneath the noise. He didn't hear me, but I meant it. Enjoy it, because laughter built on another man's humiliation always curdles into silence when the truth comes to light. I excused myself, stepping outside for air. The night was cold, sharp against my skin. The sky above was heavy with clouds, the kind that swallow stars whole. I leaned against the brick wall, breathing deep, letting the anger drain from me. Anger is fuel, yes, but uncontrolled it burns the wrong bridges. I needed control. I needed patience. That's when the bartender stepped outside for a smoke. He lit his cigarette, glanced at me, then did a double take. His eyes narrowed, then widened, recognition flickering across his face. "Hey, are you—" He stopped himself, shaking his head. "Never mind. Thought I knew you." I gave him a small nod, but inside, my pulse quickened. It wasn't the first time in recent days someone had looked at me that way. The dealer at the casino, now this man. Recognition, not of the present me, the quiet father, the humiliated man, but of someone I once was. When I walked back inside, my son was still basking in his audience, but the moment had shifted for me. I wasn't just a father enduring his child's cruelty. I was a man rediscovering pieces of himself that had been buried for years. The night dragged on. My son grew louder, sloppier. His stories turned into slurs, his jokes into insults that even his friends stopped laughing at. Finally, he staggered out, leaving me to settle the check. Typical. Always the showman, never the anchor. As I handed the money to the waitress, she looked at me with a softness that hadn't been there before. "You're better than this crowd," she said quietly. "Don't let him drag you down." I gave her a small smile, pocketing the change. "I won't," I replied, and I meant it. When I got home that night, I sat again at the kitchen table, the chip still in my pocket. I placed it down, beside the cigar box, beside the flag, beside the pocket watch, symbols of past and present, lined up like soldiers awaiting orders. I thought of my wife, gone too soon. She would have hated to see our son become this. She would have told me to be patient, to trust that truth reveals itself in time. But she would also have reminded me that sometimes patience must be paired with action. That night, I opened the old photo albums. Not to mourn, but to remember. Photos of me in uniforms, at parades, at events where my name meant something. My son never asked about those days. He thought my life began and ended with the grease-stained coveralls of an auto shop. He had no idea that before that, I had stood in rooms where respect was given, not mocked. As I turned the pages, a plan began to form. Not a reckless lashing out, not a bitter confrontation, something quieter, sharper. If my son wanted to strip me of dignity in public, then public would be the stage where the truth returned to me. The opportunity came sooner than I imagined. 2 weeks later, my son invited me to a family gathering at his friend's house. "Big barbecue," he said. "Everyone important's gonna be there. You should come. Don't embarrass me, though." Embarrass him. The irony was bitter in my mouth. He had no idea that embarrassment had been my meal for weeks, force-fed by his hand. The day of the barbecue was bright. The kind of summer day where the air smells of grilled meat and cut grass. Families gathered in the backyard. Children running with sticky fingers. Adults holding beers and swapping stories. My son strutted around as if he owned the place, introducing himself with exaggerated confidence, laughing too loudly at jokes, slapping backs harder than necessary. When he saw me, he waved me over. Here he is, my dad, the man who taught me everything I know. His tone dripped with irony. Some laughed, some smiled politely. He leaned closer to me and whispered, "Try to keep up, old man." I smiled faintly, saying nothing. But the day would not end in his laughter. I could feel it. The tide was turning, slowly but surely. The same recognition I had seen in the dealer, in the bartender, was about to resurface in ways my son could not laugh away. And what happened at that barbecue would become the first crack in the wall of his arrogance, the first sign that the father he mocked was not a man to be dismissed. Because sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. Sometimes it waits for the right moment to step back into the light. At the barbecue, I sat quietly at a picnic table under the shade of a maple tree, nursing a glass of lemonade. Around me, the air buzzed with laughter, smoke from the grill, and the squeals of children darting between legs. My son floated from group to group like a politician, shaking hands, slapping shoulders, talking too loudly. His friends, the kind who clung to the nearest loudmouth with a pocket full of cash, laughed at every joke, nodded at every boast. I wasn't blind. I saw how some of the older men raised their eyebrows at him, how some of the women exchanged looks when he bragged about his business ventures. But my son didn't notice. Arrogance blinds a man faster than age ever does. He spotted me finally sitting alone and waved me over. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, "this is my father, the man who taught me everything I know." He said it with a grin that told everyone the punchline was coming, except how to win at cards, or how to make money, or how to keep up. The crowd laughed politely, not the kind of laugh that grows from humor, but the awkward, forced chuckle people give when they don't know what else to do. Still, my son beamed, proud of his little performance. I gave a small nod, sipping my lemonade. Silence again was my shield, but silence is also a canvas, and sometimes others choose to paint on it. One of the older men at the barbecue, a stocky fellow with a gray mustache and the kind of handshake that once broke knuckles in his youth, stepped closer. He squinted at me, studying my face. "I know you," he said slowly. My son rolled his eyes. "Yeah, sure, everyone knows Dad. He's always hanging around casinos, losing pennies." More laughter. The man ignored him. He turned directly to me. "You were in the service, weren't you? Back in the day. 2nd Airborne, if I'm not mistaken." The air shifted. Conversation stuttered. A couple of heads turned toward us. I met his gaze. "That was a long time ago." His eyes lit up with recognition. "I knew it. I remember your face from Fort Bragg. You ran the training drills, didn't you? Hard as nails, but fair. You had a reputation." I could feel my son stiffen beside me. For the first time in weeks, his smirk faltered. "I just did my job," I said, my tone even. The man clapped me on the back, nearly spilling my lemonade. "Just did your job. You don't give yourself enough credit. You saved lives. I remember hearing stories about that mission overseas. You pulled 2 men out of fire when everyone else thought they were gone." Silence spread through the crowd like ripples in water. My son shifted uncomfortably, trying to laugh it off. "Well, that was ages ago. These days He trailed off, realizing too late that the audience wasn't with him anymore. Another voice chimed in, a woman this time, mid-50s, with kind eyes. "Wait, you're Harold Johnson, aren't you? My brother served under you. He used to tell us about a Sergeant Johnson who never let his men go hungry, who made sure everyone got mail from home even when supplies were short. He said you were the kind of leader who made people believe they could survive anything." All eyes turned to me. My son stood there, his mouth half open, his drink trembling slightly in his hand. For the first time, the spotlight had shifted, and it wasn't his. I felt something I hadn't in years. Recognition, respect, the weight of my name restored. I placed my glass gently on the table and looked around. Like I said, I murmured, that was a long time ago. But the crowd leaned closer, hungry for more. And my son looked like a boy again, caught stealing from the cookie jar, exposed in front of the world. He tried to recover, forcing a laugh. Sure, old war stories. But what's that got to do with today? Times change. You know, Dad never made much money. Never really. He caught himself, realizing he was digging deeper. But the silence from the crowd told him it was too late. The man with the mustache cut in, his voice firm. Money doesn't measure a man. Service does. Character does. Respect does. And from where I'm standing, your father's worth more than a room full of chips. The barbecue had shifted. Conversations turned to me, not him. People asked questions, shared memories, offered handshakes. Children tugged at their parents, curious about the stories being told. My son stood on the edge of it all, excluded, ignored, his glass empty. For once, I didn't feel humiliated. I felt seen, not as a relic, not as a burden, but as a man who had lived, fought, and endured. Later, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the yard, my son cornered me near the fence. His face was red, not from the sun but from humiliation. You couldn't just sit there quietly, could you? He hissed. I looked at him evenly. I didn't say a word. Other people did. You enjoyed it, he accused, watching them fawn over you, listening to those old stories. You loved it. I let a small smile curl at the corner of my mouth. Respect feels different from mockery. Maybe one day you'll learn the difference. His jaw clenched. For a moment I thought he might strike me, but instead he stormed off, slamming the gate behind him so hard it rattled. The crowd noticed. They looked at me, then back at the gate, questions in their eyes. I shrugged, pretending it was nothing. But inside, I knew the cracks in his arrogance were widening. That night, back at home, I sat again at the kitchen table with the cigar box open before me. The chip lay beside the pocket watch, the folded flag, the letters. But now, instead of seeing it as a wound, I saw it as a tool. Revenge, after all, isn't about hurting back. It's about teaching. It's about balance. My son needed to learn that a man's worth isn't counted in chips or bills, but in the lives he's touched, the respect he's earned, the dignity he carries even when mocked. But teaching a grown man is harder than teaching a child. Sometimes, the only way to open his eyes is to let him fall, then stand tall beside him. I began to plan, quietly, patiently. Over the next weeks, I watched my son spiral. His debts caught up with him. Creditors called. His friends stopped answering. The casino that once cheered his entrance now greeted him with wary eyes. The smirk faded from his face, replaced with shadows under his eyes, lines of worry across his forehead. One night, he came to my house again, but this time there was no swagger in his step. He looked smaller, shoulders slumped, voice cracked. "Dad," he said softly, "I need help." For a moment, I saw the boy he once was, the boy who cried after losing a game, who asked if failure made him worthless. And I remembered my answer. Failure is the first step toward victory. But victory doesn't come without humility, and humility doesn't come without truth. I folded my hands on the table, looked him in the eye, and said, "Sit down. It's time you learned who I really am, and it's time you learned who you really are." I'll never forget the way he looked that night when he came to me, shoulders hunched, shirt untucked, eyes red from lack of sleep. This wasn't the same man who mocked me at the casino or strutted around the bar. This was my son stripped of his armor, standing in my doorway like a child caught in the storm. For the first time in years, his voice trembled. "Dad, I need your help." I let the silence stretch before stepping aside. He walked into the kitchen where the cigar box still sat on the table, the chip, the pocket watch, the folded flag, silent witnesses to everything we were and everything we had lost. He avoided looking at them, as if they accused him directly. He sat down heavily, elbows on the table, head in his hands. "I messed up," he whispered. "I thought I had it under control. But it's bad, Dad. Real bad." I poured him water and set the glass in front of him. He didn't touch it. His hands shook. "How bad?" I asked. He lifted his head slowly, shame heavy in his eyes. 20 grand bad. Maybe more. The casinos, the loans. I thought I could flip it, you know? Thought I could beat the odds. But it just kept getting worse. And now they're calling. They're showing up." His voice broke. "They threatened me, Dad." I studied him carefully. He wasn't lying. Fear rolled off him in waves. For a brief moment, my heart softened. This was my son, my flesh, the boy I once carried on my shoulders. But then I remembered the chip slammed on the table, the laughter in the bar, the smirk at the barbecue. And I knew help without lesson would only feed the arrogance again. "What do you expect me to do?" I asked. He leaned forward, desperation in his eyes. "You've got savings, right? The house, the pension. You could cover it. Just until I get back on my feet. I swear, I'll pay you back. Please, Dad." The audacity stung. After all the humiliation, he still believed I existed only to clean his mess. But vengeance whispered in my ear. This was the moment. Not to destroy him, but to let him see himself for what he had become. I leaned back, folding my arms. "Do you remember the night at the casino?" He flinched. "Dad, come on, don't bring that up now." "I will bring it up," I said, my voice firm. "You handed me one chip, $1. Do you remember what you said?" His face reddened. "I was just joking. You said, 'Don't lose it all at once.' You mocked me. Your own father. And now, here you are, having lost everything at once. Do you see the irony?" He opened his mouth, then shut it, eyes wet. I reached into the cigar box and pulled out the chip. I placed it between us on the table. "This is all I owe you, one chip, because that's what you decided I was worth." His breath caught. He stared at the chip as if it were a mirror reflecting every failure. "Dad, please," he whispered. "I'm begging you." I held his gaze. "No, not this time. You wanted to humiliate me in front of strangers, in front of family. You wanted to prove I was nothing. Now you want me to save you. Why? So you can laugh at me again?" Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't speak. I softened my tone slightly. "I won't give you money, but I'll give you something better, the truth. You've been chasing luck, thinking it makes you a man. But luck runs out. Dignity doesn't. Respect doesn't. You lost those long before you lost the money." He buried his face in his hands. His shoulders shook. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he whispered, "What do I do?" I reached into the box again, this time pulling out the folded flag. I laid it on the table gently. "You rebuild, not with cards, not with lies, with work, with humility, with the kind of effort you've never shown. You start from the bottom, the way every man must, and until you're willing to do that, I can't help you." He looked at the flag, confusion in his eyes. "What is that?" "My brother's flag," I said quietly. "He died serving this country. They folded it and handed it to me. Do you think he cared about poker chips, about fast cars or flashy watches? He cared about duty, honor, family. He gave everything for those things. And you—" I stopped, my throat tightening. "You've mocked the very sacrifices that let you sit at that casino table." He wiped his eyes, but said nothing. That night, he left without another word. The door closed softly like a question mark hanging in the air. I sat alone with the chip, the flag, and the silence. Days passed. He didn't call, didn't come by. I heard whispers in town, men looking for him, debts unpaid. I stayed quiet. My revenge wasn't loud. It was in the patience and in letting the truth do its work. Then, one afternoon, the phone rang. It was the dealer from the casino, the same man who had frozen when he saw my ID weeks ago. "Mr. Johnson," he said carefully, "I don't mean to intrude, but your son's been here again, and he's not safe. He owes the wrong people. I thought you should know." I thanked him, hung up, and sat back. The plan crystallized. If my son wouldn't learn through words, he would learn through exposure, through facing himself in the mirror of consequence. That Friday night, I walked into the casino. Not with fear, not with hesitation. The same neon lights glared, the same hum of machines echoed. But this time, whispers followed me. The dealer nodded with quiet respect. Security guards exchanged glances. They remembered. They knew. I found my son at a table, sweating, desperate, losing. His stack of chips was thin, his face pale. He didn't see me at first. When he did, shock flashed across his eyes. "Dad, what are you doing here?" I stepped closer. "Watching." He shook his head. "You can't. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said, placing the single chip on the felt in front of him. The dealer's eyes widened again, but said nothing. "This is what you gave me. Tonight, I give it back. Let's see what you can do with the same dignity you denied me." Gasps rippled around the table. My son's hands trembled. He looked at the chip, then at me, then at the dealer. The dealer leaned forward. "Minimum bet's higher than that." "I know," I said calmly, "but sometimes the smallest stake carries the greatest weight." The crowd around the table grew. Whispers of my name floated. Men and women glanced, curious, intrigued. My son wilted under the attention, sweat dripping down his temple. For the first time, he wasn't the center of power. I was, not through money, not through bravado, but through presence. He pushed the chip forward, voice shaking. "Bet." The cards fell. The game played. He lost. The chip was gone. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Now you understand. Everything you mocked me for. This is who you've become. One chip. Nothing more. Until you learn to build again. With honesty, with work, with respect. This will always be your story." He broke then, right there at the table, in front of strangers. He wept. Not loud, not dramatic, but quietly, shoulders shaking, face buried in his hands. The humiliation he had given me returned to him tenfold, but not as revenge, as revelation. I stood tall, turned, and walked out of the casino. Behind me, whispers followed. Some called my name. Some simply watched. My son remained at the table, broken, stripped of the arrogance that once made him blind. That night, as I placed the cigar box back on the shelf, I realized something. Vengeance had never been about destruction. It was about truth. And truth, when revealed, is the sharpest weapon of all. I looked at the pocket watch, ticking softly. Time moves on, but dignity remains. And somewhere out there, my son now carried the weight of his own choices. Whether he rose from it or sank beneath it was no longer my burden. I had given him the lesson. The rest was his. The night after the casino felt strangely quiet. Too quiet. I had walked out with my head high, leaving behind the echo of my son's sobs at the blackjack table. For weeks I had been the target of his ridicule, reduced to a joke, treated as a relic. But now, the weight had shifted. He sat in that casino broken, humiliated by his own reflection, while I walked free, carrying nothing but dignity. Yet vengeance has an aftertaste. It lingers, both bitter and sweet. Sweet because justice has been served. Bitter because justice often reveals wounds too deep to heal overnight. As I sat alone in my kitchen, the cigar box open before me, I wondered if I had gone too far. Had I taught him the lesson, or had I destroyed him entirely? The house was silent except for the ticking of my brother's pocket watch. I touched the folded flag gently, then closed my eyes. My wife's voice came to me, soft and steady, as if she were still standing in the doorway. "Don't break him, Harold. Bend him if you must, but don't break him. He's still your boy." I wanted to believe she was right, but the image of my son at that table, shaking, weeping, stripped of arrogance, wasn't easy to shake. 3 days passed before I saw him again. He came to the house near midnight, knocking softly as though ashamed of being heard. When I opened the door, he looked smaller, thinner, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. He stepped inside without a word, carrying nothing but the smell of sweat and cigarette smoke. He sat at the kitchen table, the same place where so many of our confrontations had begun, and buried his face in his hands. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he whispered, "I lost everything." I poured him water and slid it across the table. He took it this time, drinking like a man dying of thirst. His hands trembled. "Not just money," he said, voice cracking. "My friends, my job, the people I thought had my back. They're gone. And after what happened at the casino, I don't think I can ever walk in there again. They all saw me break." I sat across from him, silent, letting his words hang. He looked up at me, eyes shining with something I hadn't seen in years. Honesty. Raw, painful honesty. "Dad, I mocked you. I treated you like nothing. I laughed at you in front of strangers, in front of family. And you showed me who I really am. You didn't have to say it. I saw it. I saw myself." My chest tightened. For years, I had waited for this moment. An admission, a crack in his arrogance. Now it was here, and it felt heavier than I imagined. He leaned forward, desperation in his voice. "How do I fix it? Tell me what to do. Please." I looked at him carefully. He wasn't the boy who begged for quarters at the corner store. He wasn't the man who bragged at the bar. He was something in between. A man-child standing at the edge of ruin. "You start by working," I said quietly. "Not gambling, not scheming. Work, honest work. You take whatever job will have you, no matter how small. You earn your bread with sweat, not lies." He frowned. I don't know how to." "You don't know how to work?" I interrupted, my voice sharper than intended. "You don't know how to sweat, how to stand, how to show up day after day, then you don't know how to live." His face fell, but he didn't argue. I softened my tone. "I can't hand you money. That would only dig your hole deeper. But I can hand you guidance. You choose whether to take it." He nodded slowly, swallowing hard. "I'll try." That word, try, hung in the air like smoke. Over the next weeks, I watched him stumble. He took odd jobs, sweeping floors at a mechanic's shop, hauling boxes at a warehouse, washing dishes at a diner, work he once would have sneered at. His hands grew calloused, his back sore. He cursed under his breath some nights, but he kept going, and each time he came by, he looked different, a little less arrogant, a little more human. One evening, he brought me his paycheck, still folded in its envelope. "I don't deserve to keep this," he said, sliding it across the table. I pushed it back. "It's yours. You earned it. That's the point." He stared at me, eyes glassy. "Feels different. Better. Not like the casino, not fake. Because it's real," I said. "Because it came from your hands, not from luck." For the first time in years, he smiled. Not a smirk, not a performance, but a genuine smile. But redemption is not a straight road. One Saturday night, temptation clawed at him again. I found him standing outside the casino, staring at the neon lights, his fists clenched. "I just wanted to see it," he said when he noticed me. just to feel it again. I stepped beside him, looking at the glow. That place doesn't hold your answers. It only holds your ghosts. He turned to me, anguish in his eyes. How do you walk away? How do you stay strong? I thought for a moment. Because I know who I am without it. Until you find that, you'll keep looking for it in cards, in chips, in other people's laughter. But the truth is, it's not out there. It's in here. I tapped his chest gently. He nodded, biting his lip, tears brimming. He turned away from the lights and walked with me into the night. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, painfully, he rebuilt. He paid down debts bit by bit, not with showy stacks of cash but with steady envelopes of honest earnings. He began repairing his reputation, one handshake, one apology at a time. And something remarkable happened. He started to listen, not to the cheers of shallow friends, not to the empty promises of casinos, but to me, to the lessons I had tried to teach him long ago. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun sink behind the trees, he said, "Dad, I don't know how to thank you." I looked at him, the man he was slowly becoming. "Don't thank me. Live better. That's thanks enough." He nodded, quiet for a long time. Then he added, "You know, that night at the casino, when you handed me the chip, that broke me, but it also saved me." I didn't answer. Some truths don't need words. Time moved on. The debts disappeared. The arrogance faded. In its place grew humility, respect, and, slowly, love. Real love. The kind that doesn't mock, doesn't humiliate, doesn't need an audience. One Sunday, at church, he stood up during the service. His voice shook as he spoke. "I want to apologize, to my father, to everyone I disrespected. I thought money made me a man. I was wrong. Watching my father stand with dignity while I crumbled, that showed me what real strength is. I want to live like that. I want to honor him." The congregation turned to me. My throat tightened. My eyes burned. For the first time in years, I felt my wife's presence again, smiling from somewhere unseen. After the service, people came to shake my hand, to pat my shoulder, to say, "You raised him right after all." I smiled politely, but inside I knew the truth. It wasn't me who raised him this time. It was humiliation. It was consequence. It was the chip, the table, the silence. That night, back in my kitchen, I opened the cigar box one final time. I looked at the pocket watch, the flag, the letters, and I looked at the empty space where the chip had once rested. I had given it back to him, and in doing so, I had given him back himself. I closed the box, slid it onto the shelf, and whispered into the quiet room, "It's finished." But was it revenge? Or was it something else? Maybe revenge was just the mask for something deeper, for love that refuses to die, even when buried under years of arrogance and cruelty. I don't know what you would call it. All I know is this: dignity cannot be handed over like a chip on a table. It must be lived, earned, carried. And when someone tries to strip it from you, sometimes the best revenge is simply to stand tall until the truth speaks for itself. And you, yes, you listening now, what would you have done in my place? Would you have let your own child humiliate you without striking back? Or would you have found the patience to let the truth teach the lesson for you? Maybe the real question is this: do we bend those we love, or do we break them? Because sometimes, the hardest vengeance is not in destroying someone's pride, but in rebuilding their soul.